Race for Children Act, Metrics of Success. My name is Nancy Goodman. I'm the Executive Director of Kids v. Cancer in Washington, D.C. I have nothing to disclose. So the issue of Race for Children Act that we sought to address is this. There were hundreds of drugs in the adult pipeline, and few of them were being studied in children with cancer. And the result was this, in part, my son Jacob, who died at age 10 of medulloblastoma. The drugs used to treat Jacob were 40 years old, and they did not work. So the solution was to draft Race for Children Act, which authorizes the FDA to require pediatric studies of adult investigational oncology drugs when the molecular targets of the drugs are substantially related to a pediatric cancer. And the role of advocates, we are really outside of the medical ecosystem, is to look from our point of view and ask, what political or legislative reforms can we introduce to make the ecosystem more effective? We took this draft of Race for Children Act and we went to Congress, asking Congress to pass it. And the next slide is a slide of our advocates in the basement of a House office building between meetings. So I'd like to show you what
this next part's my favorite part. This time is shy. Gonna do the two-step and cowboy boogie. Grab a sweetheart and spin out with them. Do the hold down and get into it. Take it to the...
So with advocates like that, how can anyone fail? In fact, Congress was passed into law in 2017 as an amendment to the Pediatric Research Equity Act, 21 U.S.C. 355, and pursuant to the statutory language, it was fully implemented in 2020. So, Metrics of Success for Race for Children Act. It's been a tremendously successful piece of legislation, and we are just so thrilled to see the number of pediatric cancer trials with investigational drugs go from only a handful to many, many. Anecdotal reports from pediatric cancer researchers indicate that whereas before Race for Children Act, it was exceedingly difficult to get access to clinical supply of novel therapies, now pharmaceutical companies are more interested in pediatric cancer research. And finally, there are a flurry of new medical meetings to implement race, such as, for example, this very meeting. So what are the next steps to implement race and to hit even higher metric targets? Well, first, the question is one of picking the best targets for race studies. All children with cancer should be molecularly screened. We need to support research to identify as many novel targets in pediatric cancers as possible. The pipeline for drugs under development in pharmaceutical companies should be, and hopefully would be, as transparent as possible, in particular in the preclinical stages, giving pediatric cancer oncologists opportunity for preclinical studies to shape future pediatric study plans pursuant to race. Efficient trial designs are also important. We have a small number of N-of-1 studies, a master protocol, but in fact, more master protocols, more bucket trials, octopus trials would be effective to efficiently and quickly study the greatest number of novel therapies for pediatric cancers. The FDA has been generous in encouraging sponsors to use historical control arms instead of putting seriously ill kids on control arms with no hope of treatment. But the fact is, sponsors are still having a significant difficulty accessing NCI data to construct these control arms. The next implementation step that would be important to achieve better metrics for race focuses on completion of trials. As I noted before, Race for Children Act amends the Pediatric Research Equity Act. About half of all pediatric studies under the Pediatric Research Equity Act were never completed. And so it's important to guard against this outcome and to ensure that all race studies that should be completed are. And finally, funding of clinical trials. Many sponsors are holding the IND and fully funding the trials, but it's important that others who may be focused on funding data collection, providing clinical supply, maybe only asking for right of record, it's important to double back and ask these companies what they can do to more fully support the trials that enable them to meet their regulatory requirements. Otherwise, philanthropic funds and NCI funds are going to be dedicated to fulfilling corporate requirements instead of enabling academic researchers to look at their priority studies. And finally, the FDA has done just an incredible job of implementing race. Greg Greenman's office is an unfunded mandate, and we need to work to ask Congress to ensure that he has the staff he needs to do the job he wants to do, and that he is doing. So what are the pieces of race that are not meeting positive metric measurements? And in particular, the question that I see is that most race studies are single agent studies or single agent studies plus chemotherapy. And the challenge there, of course, is that it may be very difficult to achieve durable responses without considering novel combinations. Immunotherapies, targeted therapies, precision medicines have all created opportunities for us to identify therapies that really may be resistant, may address resistance. And it's exciting. It's an opportunity that we don't want to withhold from kids just because race doesn't reach this far. There are so many challenges in considering combination studies, in particular when the drugs that pediatric oncologists wish to study are from different companies. It's even difficult to identify which combinations to study. Science is there, but it's also developing more and more ways to address the identification of productive combinations. And it's hard for pediatric oncologists to get access to novel agents for pediatric preclinical studies. There's the risk of toxicity of combination therapies, of course. There's also the risk of benefit, that there be a benefit and companies have to figure out how to work together with premium priced therapies. But at the end of the day, the metrics of success for race have not been fully achieved because kids are not living longer, healthier lives. And that's the goal. And this is a picture of Francesca Kaczynski, who did not live her longer and healthier life. And she died 10 years after Jacob did, Christmas Eve, 2020. So that's the metric that we really want to achieve. And I'll leave you with this question. This will be the next child who will be diagnosed with cancer. And what therapies will we have to offer her that provide her a healthy and long life? Thank you.